dive into the untold story of RMS Carpathia. While everyone knows it as the heroic ship that rescued the 712 survivors of the Titanic disaster, its journey didn't end there. Join us as we explore the final years of Carpathia's life and uncover the tragic fate that followed. Carpathia and its crew had rightfully received much recognition and adulation for having rescued Titanic survivors. Carpathia resumed its career as a passenger liner, but this peaceful service was not to last. Following the outbreak of World War I in 1914, just slightly over 2 years following the Titanic disaster, more and more passenger liners were pressed into service by the Allies as troop transports. Carpathia was initially utilized to transport Canadian troops to the battlefields of Europe. Once Germany declared unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917, massive losses of merchant and military shipping forced the Allies to employ convoys in an attempt to stem the losses. Following this, Carpathia often traveled in convoys, sailing from New York and Halifax to Liverpool and Glasgow. In May 1915, a woman only identified as Beatty had arrived in Quebec aboard the RMS Missinaba. During this transatlantic crossing, the passengers and crew were horrified when they sailed through a field of debris and bodies from the sinking of the RMS Lusitania. Beatty described the cheers that went up from Canadian troops aboard Carpathia as her ship arrived in port. We got back to the ship at 4:45 p.m. and walked along to where Carpathia was anchored with 2,000 soldiers on board, bound for England. My, how they shouted when they saw our ship come in, some waving their shirts from the portholes and singing "Are We Downhearted?" Following the United States' entry into the conflict in April 1917, Carpathia was also used to transport American expeditionary forces to Europe. During this service, Carpathia's funnel was painted battleship gray, a sharp contrast to its typical Cunard red color. By March 1918, Carpathia had been painted in a Dazzle camouflage scheme. Dazzle camouflage involved painting the hulls and superstructure of ships in confusing geometric shapes and sharp lines with strongly contrasting colors that intersected and interrupt each other to distort their silhouette. This would make it difficult for U-boat crews to determine the ship's heading and thus make it more difficult to calculate an accurate firing solution. Noted maritime artist Norman Wilkinson was involved in the development of Dazzle camouflage, which was quickly deployed by the Allies. This was in desperation to stop the staggering shipping losses that had occurred starting in 1917. Sadly, on July 17, 1918, after surviving numerous transatlantic crossings, Carpathia's luck ran out. She had joined a convoy in Liverpool which consisted of 7 vessels traveling in a zigzag pattern at 10 knots to avoid U-boats. By 9:15 a.m., the convoy's escorts had departed, leaving the ships on their own. On this particular voyage, Carpathia was not transporting troops, just civilian passengers. U-boat U-55, commanded by Wilhelm Werner, penetrated the convoy and fired 2 torpedoes, one striking the port side near the number 3 hold and stokehold below the bridge, and the second striking the engine room, disabling the ship. 2 firemen and 3 trimmers were killed below deck, and 2 engineers were badly scalded. Carpathia carried one 6-inch deck gun aft, but this was of no use in such an ambush attack. Captain William Prothero gave the order to abandon ship, and as was standard practice, the other vessels in the convoy departed at high speed to to avoid falling victim to U-55. Carpathia began sailing by the bow and listing to port. U-55 circled the stricken liner, waiting until the passengers and crew had abandoned ship before firing a third torpedo into it. Carpathia sank within minutes. Fortunately, besides the victims killed below deck following the initial torpedo impacts, nobody else was killed. The survivors were later picked up by the HMS Snowdrop. At one point, it was disputed whether Carpathia had received Dazzle camouflage, or if it still had it at the time of its sinking. The only known photograph of the ship sinking, taken from the U-boat which sank it, was at a distance, and the contrast in the image does not allow for a definitive answer. However, brief footage taken by the British Admiralty for a film called The Way of a Ship on the Sea ends all debate. Produced in March 1918 as a news feature, just months prior to Carpathia's loss, this production focuses on the Allied efforts to supply and maintain shipping to the Allies. At one point in the film, the boat the cameraman was on glides past Carpathia's entire port side as it sits alongside the pier, revealing in clarity the Dazzle camouflage pattern. While this segment lasts less than a minute in the entire production, it is amazing to see additional footage of Carpathia, her name visible on her hull, with her gangway doors open, the very doors through which Titanic survivors passed upon their rescue in 1912. Despite her sad end, Carpathia remains a liner worth remembering and commemorating, along with all of those who sailed on her.
A special thank you to our supporters on Patreon, Nikki Chan 92, Mark Gegenheimer, Maximilian Metcalf, and Rachel Warner Sanchez.